Obsessed with the idea of the superiority of the pure German race, which he called Aryan, Hitler believed that war was the only way to achieve Lebensraum, meaning the living space necessary for the German race to expand. This Lebensraum was planned by the Great German Reich and extended eastward to the Ural Mountains in Russia. Furthermore, this expansion included General Plan Ost, a secret plan for genocide and ethnic cleansing. However, the area actually occupied by Nazi Germany was somewhat different, as they didn't occupy Sweden but did occupy France and other regions of Europe. Germany went from occupying 469,000 square kilometers in 1925 under the Weimar Republic to occupying 824,000 square kilometers in 1940 as Nazi Germany. If we also consider the territories occupied both civilly and militarily during the war, the total extent would be close to 2,700,000 square kilometers, making it the 10th largest country in the world. Currently, Germany has even less territory than in 1925 and is in 64th place with 358,000 square kilometers. Germany suffered several problems and mistakes that condemned it to defeat in World War II. Among the problems contributing to Germany's defeat in World War II were an insufficient war economy in the early years, the start of a two-front war, weak supply lines on the Russian front, errors in key battles such as Kursk and Stalingrad, and the declaration of war on the US. Additionally, compared to its main rivals, Germany had fewer resources. While it was not far behind the USSR in terms of GDP, the British Empire and the US had more than double. Furthermore, its three rivals had much larger populations and vast territories from which to extract resources. One of the key war resources was scarce in Germany, while it was abundant in countries like the US and the Soviet Union. But what if the Nazis had won the war? This hypothetical Axis victory has been explored extensively over the decades. 35 novels have been written, 5 films have been made, 6 video games have been released, and 5 TV series have been produced on this theme, with the most famous being the Amazon series The Man in the High Castle, known in Spain as El Hombre en el Castillo. Let's analyze the situation before the onset of the German defeat. The fact that Great Britain is an island meant that a Nazi invasion would have been difficult without air and maritime superiority. However, if the Germans had won the Battle of Britain and the evacuation of Dunkirk, they could have altered the final outcome, making either an invasion or a negotiated peace possible. The invasion of the Soviet Union was Hitler's worst mistake. Although it's true that the initial phase of Operation Barbarossa was favorable for the Nazis, geography, population, and oil production were firmly against the Germans. Despite this, they managed to capture a vast stretch of territory. Some things that Germany could have done better include bringing appropriate winter clothing and supplies, making better use of the people they considered racially inferior in the captured areas who also hated the Soviet Union, such as the Ukrainians, and finally, making the capture of the Caucasus oil fields a top priority. However, even correcting these details, the chances of a Nazi victory were low, but not impossible. Everything would have depended on how the cards were played. The final major obstacle for the Germans would have been the US. Aside from the Nazis developing atomic weapons before them, there was no realistic way Germany could have defeated the US. It had a larger economy than all the Axis powers combined at its peak, and also had a much larger population than Germany. Additionally, it had enough oil to supply its own army, navy, and air force. Declaring war on the US was Hitler's final fatal mistake. Therefore, the best scenario for Germany would have been a stalemate similar to the Cold War. With World War II over, Hitler would have had the perfect scenario to execute his General Plan Ost and eliminate what he considered to be wild Slavs. These are the projected percentage to be eliminated from each nation, a total of about 110 million people. 15 million would be deported to Siberia, and the remaining 54 million would need to be Germanized to provide labor in a state of servitude. Otherwise, they would also be deported. Both he and Himmler estimated that, within 25 years, about 10 million Germans would colonize the new lands. But those who would fare the worst would be the Jews. Hitler's plan was to exterminate them completely, and in many countries, this situation was already advanced. In countries like Poland, Greece, Lithuania, and Yugoslavia, more than 80% of the Jews had already been exterminated. In total, 60% of the Jews in these countries were killed. With a Nazi victory, the nearly 4 million remaining Jews would have met the same fate. Added to the Slavs, the total number of additional deaths caused by a German victory would have risen to 114 million people. To compare, the approximate death toll in World War II is 80 million, which was 3% of the world's population. 1/3 of those deaths were military, and 2/3 were civilian. Continuing with comparisons, this was the deadliest war in history. Only 5 diseases have killed more people throughout history. So the question remains, who would have won the Cold War between the US and Nazi Germany? Possibly, the US would fund and train Russian partisans to fight the Germans in the 1970s, an era of sexual revolution, hippies, and modern art. None of this would be seen in Nazi Europe, which would become part of an illegal suburban movement. The Cuban Missile Crisis might have had its counterpart in Iceland, which would fall under German influence to install medium-range missiles capable of reaching the US and Canada. Speculating further into the future is pure fantasy, as the possibilities are endless. But if I had to choose, I'd bet on a US victory in the Cold War and the fall of the Nazi regime, which would bring back free markets and individual freedom to Europe. Imagine if present-day Germany had retained the territories acquired during the war, considering its maximum expansion with both civil and military-occupied territories. As mentioned, in terms of land area, Germany would move from being the 64th largest country to the 10th largest in the world. The population jump would be smaller, as it would increase from 83 million, 17th place, to the 4th most populous country in the world, behind only China, India, and the US. The 5 most populous metropolitan areas would be Paris, Berlin, Stuttgart, Frankfurt, and Katowice, with 3 of them in Germany. In terms of GDP, China would feel the competition from behind, as Germany would have about $9 trillion, comfortably surpassing Japan along the way. However, the GDP per capita would drop from $48,200 to $33,400 annually, a figure affected by countries like Ukraine and Belarus. Christianity would be the dominant religion, with 73% of the population, 14% Protestant, 40% Catholic, 15% Orthodox, and 4% of other denominations. There would also be 4% Muslims, 1% of other religions, and 21% would be atheists and agnostics. In terms of military expenditure, Germany would rise from 9th to 3rd place, again behind the US and China, but far ahead of Saudi Arabia. This spending would represent only 1.5% of its GDP, the lowest percentage among the top 7. On the other hand, the German military would move up 20 positions, from 27th to 7th, with 819,000 active soldiers, very close to Russia. However, if we consider reserve forces, it would drop 1 position, but still remain ahead of the US and close to China. Regarding oil production, the occupation of Norway would place Germany at 14th, as Norway would produce 84% of the 1,960,000 daily barrels. It's estimated that around 300 million soldiers from around the world fought in World War II. Do you have any relatives who participated? What's their story? Share your answer in the comments and subscribe to see more videos like this.